So it's really, really lovely to be with you. I have to run to the airport right after this, so I just want to give you that disclosure that I don't want to be rude, but I will miss my flight and have been away from my family for 5 days. So I do need to get home tonight. I know this is a community media class, and I know I operate two community media properties essentially, but I kind of thought like, having gone through journalism school myself, but a very long time ago, and also working with so many students and interns and talent as we do, I sort of thought I'd structure this as like, what do you need to know, as opposed to how I operate. So I'm really going to try to turn the lens on lessons from what I've built, my mainstream media career, but really through the lens of like what I wish I knew when I was in your position. And hopefully that works. I will, like around maybe 2:30, so in like half an hour, turn it over to all of you for questions or just to get more interactive. If anything resonates as I'm talking, please feel free to interrupt me, tell me that it resonates. I do also, just as you're like asking a question, or if you say anything, just tell me who you are, maybe like where you're from and whether you work on any of the community media outlets that I know.
That's another class.
That's a different class.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a different class. And then some of you are like gen ed too, right?
So this is the gen ed class. Like if you guys just want to say, your quick intro.
Okay. Why don't we do that? So because there's a lot of stuff that's about business, and so if there's a lot of business people, I'd love to.
A lot of business people.
Okay, all right, good. Okay, so you don't really care about journalism school. So this is great, actually, because so much of what my like recent journey has been this discovery that after a career at all of these places, I worked at CNN, I handled economics coverage for the Wall Street Journal. So those of you in finance might be interested in that. I was the managing editor of the LA Times. I worked at the Washington Post, so the Associated Press. I launched a digital outlet called Quartz, and I started my career at Newsday. When I went into business for myself, I realized I had more in common with the hot dog vendor down the street than I did with my fellow journalists. And so I think any of you who are thinking about entrepreneurship, startups, hopefully some of this journey will resonate. You know, one of the downsides of I guess journalism, journalists as entrepreneurs, is that they don't always approach this as a business, right? And so there's this kind of earnest entry, like it's the fourth estate. Obviously, we're a pillar of democracy. We're very necessary. And yet, figuring out the business model, which is really what I'm going to be talking about, is like kind of the elephant in the room. And so I feel like all of you are more equipped to solve for some of that. And I'm elated to see that you're taking a community media or a journalism class, just because hopefully you can apply this in other careers that you go into, or maybe you will end up in media somehow. So this is the humble brag slide. Like, I've taught for 5 years. I haven't taught in a long time, but I taught at Columbia Journalism School, CUNY, St. John's, UMass. I both won a Pulitzer for the LA Times, was on the Pulitzer jury. I've won Edward R. Murrow Awards. I've written 2 books. You know, like as we launched, we got a lot of notoriety for, you know, like you could see this Axios, ex-CNN executive starts media venture for communities of color. This was in 2021, right after the murder of George Floyd. And so there was still kind of a focus on communities of color in a way that I had never seen in my career before. You know, as we're all in the middle of right now, the anti-DEI backlash is like almost a direct result of, I think, the energy around what we saw in 2020. But nonetheless, like this is kind of the, like the reception that we got as we launched these companies. This is how it really feels to run a business, right? Which is smooth on the outside. Like people are saying, oh, you're doing amazing things. And I just saw this, whatever you did. And those of you who are in marketing know that that's kind of the point. But running a business, when I say like I have more in common with the hot dog vendor down the street, like the hustle is real, right? And so kind of that feeling of the duck that's like frantically underwater, just trying to keep it afloat. And I would say in the last year that we've had, it's become even more acute, just to kind of give you a sense of those challenges, like we came out, even before the election, we came out of the affirmative action ruling in the Supreme Court in June of 2023 to sort of the beginning of anti-DEI, both legislation and sentiment in many states. We get to the November 2024 election, but we also get to 2024, which usually for local news outlets, BIPOC community media outlets, election years from a political advertising perspective are supposed to be a boon, right? You're supposed to do pretty well. And what we actually saw in 2024, between the kind of switcheroo from Biden to Kamala, we lost some time, we lost funding, and we also saw a predominance of spend on traditional broadcast media and influencers. And so outlets like ours actually thought that 2024 would be a lot better. And we really weren't. And so I kind of share some of the economics, like before we got to this recent election and year that's been, as it's been a very tough climate to run a media business. We get to the election of Donald Trump, and many of our outlets receive federal funding through like health campaigns, anything from, and I'll talk about a little bit about this, like COVID boosters, flu shots, like just information to communities, both communities of color, but also just targeted communities across the country. That pretty immediately just shut down, right? So federal funding, instant, like that spigot is off. We also started to see the more like of the anti-DEI movement meant that a lot of companies that used to have divisions that were supporting companies like ours were no longer advertising. There wasn't necessarily like affinity groups or other corporate initiatives that were supporting not just employees of color, but again, like media that serves these communities. And so that started to be more of a hit. And then we get into the spring of 2025, which is the tariff situation, which, as some of you might have read, was very confusing in terms of who would be affected. Many of the folks who advertise with any news media really are consumer products companies. And so they were just uncertain about, are we going to be affected by this? Do we need to raise prices? So there was a pause in spend. I could kind of keep going, and then we get through the summer. I'll tell you about some things that turned around. And I would say the last 10 days or so have once again entered the climate of uncertainty because we're in a government shutdown. And so in a moment like this, companies yet again are reticent to say, yeah, we're going to spend, $50,000 on an ad campaign or marketing, or those are usually the first things to go. And so I sort of give you the struggles of running a media company at the outset, because I just wanted to get very real with you on some of the economics around this. For those of you who are studying finance, this is an acute problem to solve for, and we'll get a little bit more into diverse revenue streams and what that means. And again, I'm like pivoting a little bit just because of who's in the room. I will just dive into the community media aspect of what I do. So this is how Epicenter was founded. So I was at CNN in the spring of 2020. CNN, I don't know if you know this, is the largest news website in the world. And those of you who are staying through for some of the other speakers, Zach Wade will be speaking tomorrow. He's a extreme talent, has a really great news sense and a product sensibility. He's a former colleague. But CNN is the largest news organization on the planet. I ran breaking news coverage features. I had a pretty big team. We're in the spring of 2020 and the pandemic hits. And, like everyone else, CNN is starting to work from home. I live in Jackson Heights, Queens, which the New York Times dubbed us the epicenter of the epicenter, meaning the conditions that make Jackson Heights, for me and my family, like a great place to live. It's very densely populated. There's amazing ethnic food. You could get your dry cleaning done, a grocery store, a produce store, stationery shop. Like it's just from a commercial perspective, like an amazing place to just run your errands super efficiently. Those same conditions made it a breeding ground for COVID-19. And so we were one of the first communities that just experienced, literal death en masse. Of all of New York City's neighborhoods, more restaurant workers call Jackson Heights home than any other neighborhood. So we also had a lot of folks that had been on the front lines of exposure. And so what started happening is, because I've lived in this neighborhood on and off for about 25 years, and my husband is an artist and had been working in a lot of community art spaces, people started to ask us for help. Like, do you know how to get a COVID test? And those of you who went through lockdown and were kind of trying to figure out how to get your groceries, or is this a safe place to go? Are they masking here? Is there yeast because my mom wants to cook? Like all of those questions, right? That are in some ways existential. Like this man over here, unfortunately lost his life. He was a bike mechanic who my husband knew, lost his life at Elmhurst Hospital. And I got a call because he's undocumented and the family needed to figure out a way to either get his body or his remains to Puebla, Mexico. So like these were, so, or a question like, is there yeast at the store down the street, right? And so you're kind of toggling among very different needs. And my husband and I were fielding a lot of these questions. And the irony of working at the largest news site on the planet is that I felt very useless. I felt like CNN was not able to bridge the needs of what people were asking for, right? Really asking for, with what my community was seeking answers on. And so Epicenter was founded as a news, like I basically just said, we keep going to 50 people to find out, where can we get this? Or can somebody help this man? We ended up getting donations to a funeral home. He was cremated. We were able to send the remains home. Like it was a whole process, right? But I felt like the CNNs of the world were not actually equipped to meet these community needs. And so we started an email listserv. At CNN, the email listserv I ran was 2 million users. Epicenter started with 50. Today we have 35,000, still a long way to go before I get to 2 million users. But it has grown, and it started, I think, because it was really organic needs versus someone saying, wouldn't it be nice if we just launched a news outlet here, right? And you see the difference. I think a lot of what we're seeing in local news is like, oh, we miss this thing that used to exist, or should we start a newsroom because the newspaper in town no longer, this was very organically, like the community is asking us for help. We're turning to email to answer these questions. Can we just help, right? And so it's a very simple premise, but I think that has helped us stay alive because it's really rooted in what does the community need? And let's just try to kind of meet that need. That being said, having worked at CNN, I felt like there's a lot of benefits of being big, right? One, like you can pretty much game the internet. So I think many of you are familiar with algorithms. Your feeds, of course, are dominated by them. If you work at a CNN, you have people who basically manipulate every platform and meet the needs of that platform. So if National Taco Day is trending, you write 5 stories on tacos, right? That's kind of how the news agenda was set when I was there. Now, we also did a ton of, what does Trump's latest blah, blah mean, or fact checking, or, there was a lot of kind of more traditional news as well. But just to be honest about the nature of web traffic, there was a desire to win the internet versus serve the public. Sometimes I just want to be honest about my own role in that. I thought what's really ironic, as I'm like telling you where to get a COVID test in Queens, I'm never surfacing in Google search results, right? And I thought, it really sucks to be the best information on the internet, but the least discoverable. Does everyone know what I mean by that, right? Like you're like vetted, you check this out, like the community says they need it, but Google search results are gonna make you like the 50th page, right? And this was before the AI kind of shift, where now you get one summary result. And I thought, well, is there a way that we could leverage and achieve or leverage the trust of what I have and the quality information, but achieve scale? And it felt impossible as a tiny news outlet because remember, I have more in common with a hot dog vendor than I do with a CNN, right? And so I launched URL Media in parallel to Epicenter to say, can we band small news outlets together? And could we together achieve scale? Could we share resources on the internet so that you see what's trending? Could we get on Apple News so we at least have a chance to be the breaking news of record? and have, Epicenter, if there's a story on COVID, the latest COVID vaccine and sort of what you need to know in Queens, and like a place that's been very hard hit, would we at least have a shot versus other outlets like coming into Queens and not really telling you a ground up type of story? So we got on Apple News. We launched URL Media in January of 2021. And we also said that we would help the partners sell advertising together. So those of you who are interested in marketing, business, finance, we also said we're going to operate as a bit of an ad agency, because when you're as small as an Epicenter, while we were getting ad deals, like the ad deals that we would get through like a URL or like Hulu, Nike, they're much more Fortune 100 companies that as a local news outlet, you often don't have access to. So I just mentioned revenue models as being like really critical to understanding media today. And if I had like any advice, actually wouldn't just be for media outlets, but when you guys go to work or if you're doing summer internships, understand the business model of the place that you're working, right? Just know, how do we make our money? Where does it come from? Hopefully it's a diversified business model. For much of media and for many of the people who are kind of as a part of this conference, I think many of us came of age with single revenue models, right? A newspaper that had advertising, like circulation and classifieds and all as well. But for the most part, it's like a kind of one product that they're dependent on, right? Because I was launching these in 2020 and 2021, one of the benefits of entrepreneurship today is that we can say, well, what mistakes do we not want to repeat from everywhere we worked before, right? And I think that's a key part of entrepreneurship. So for Epicenter, which runs a series of newsletters, including the Unmuted, which is about schools, the Escape Home, which is about real estate, we receive grants. We have advertising. So that's McKinsey Publishing in the middle there. We do some sponsored content and other placements with them. And then we have events and a bit of a tip jar that has now evolved into much more donor funds. This is URL Media's revenue model, which I think should be bigger, right? Because it supports 35 news outlets. Also grants, right? Including Meghan Markle, who was one of our early supporters because she really believed in the type of storytelling that we were trying to support. Advertising, so I mentioned like NHL was one of ours. I don't think Hulu and Nike's on there. Content partnerships, so sometimes an outlet will come to us and say, we need content from Black History Month, and we'll come up with a syndication deal. It's not big money, but it is reach in a moment where it feels like we're creating all this content anyway. We're not necessarily discoverable in all the places. Could we find more partners that will then amplify that content? And then very organically and interestingly, we launched a recruiting arm. So this would be our B2B play. It started out as helping some of the newsrooms here find talent. Like, we need an editor-in-chief, we need a managing editor, we need a head of product, right now we're doing a search for a chief financial officer, we're looking for a CEO of a music radio station. You would think, oh, is this like mission creep? Like, is this relate to a media business? But because the early searches we did were all in media, now it's expanded. But also we're rooted in jobs, and we leverage distribution across multiple platforms to advertise the jobs and source talent. It actually ended up being a very lucrative arm of the business. And from a cash flow perspective, and also as you're looking at the margins, does everyone understand what I mean by that? How much money you make from a deal that you are engaged in? The margins on recruitment are much higher than advertising. And so when you're looking to diversify revenue, you're actually looking for multiple streams of revenue where you might have a little bit more cushion, right? One of the problems of the newspaper chains is that the margins started to become much, much less, as Wall Street was like, no, we need them to be much, much more, right? And so super, super basic, perhaps oversimplistic explanations I'm giving you. But again, like none of this I learned in journalism school. And I do think it's a really important part of running any business. So what I've learned, like I thought I would like skip ahead to a little of that, and we'll start to turn it over to you. Time to be at, yeah, in a few minutes. I'm sure all of you All of you are using AI? Yes? No, anybody not using AI? Great. So I had initially a weird relationship with AI as like a tool. And the reason for it was because I started to see our team using it for video and other types of content creation. And I was like, I really don't like what's being produced. Those of you who've seen this on like video, you know what I'm talking about, the voice, the kind of robotic, the random, like it has a character and the face changes. You all know what I mean, right? It was just like, this is bad. And our head of partnership said, just stay with it. By like the third or fourth one, it's going to get better. And sure enough, some of the content got better. And then she said, would you like to engage with the tools? And this was about 2.5 years ago. And we did an AI cohort actually, so small publishers could learn from each other. And there was one tool that monitors public meetings and spits out an article, a podcast, a summary, and like kind of like a sentiment, like who was in favor or against if they're discussing something. And so I use this, there's a casino proposal to come into Queens at Citi Field where the Mets play. And so I use this to monitor a number of meetings. And it saved me, I'd say about 8 hours in meetings, meaning attending, but it saved me about 6 hours in just kind of like the distilling information. But the main discovery I made was that my involvement at the beginning of the process and the end of the process was really vital. Meaning at the beginning of the process, I was kind of casting about what I was looking for because I knew the issue. At the end of the process, I was able to take what the tool had spit out and say, actually, this is wrong. This person is, yes, lobbying, but they used to be a city councilwoman in this area. So meaning there's more context you're offering. And what became clear to me was that actually it's more incumbent on people like me to be using AI than the way I had thought of it as kind of like something I could outsource to more junior people. And I think the upending we're going to see in our newsrooms is of much more senior talent or confident talent sort of engaging at the beginning of the process and the end of the process. I think there's a question over whether the middle manager or kind of like the mushy middle, if you will, really survives this upheaval in our newsrooms. And so I kind of came along and said, all right, I really think I need to get on board with this. It's going to save me time, but how can I insert myself at the beginning and the end? And for the most part, because we tell you when we're using AI, whether it's in video creation or content creation or in some of our production, I found it not just to be a time saver and like I see it as it like functions essentially as my assistant, but also it's almost like those of you who like have worked with like news, I guess you haven't really worked in newsrooms, but like it sort of functions as like the editor where you're like trying to check something out in a way that I had not anticipated. So again, like the removal of that middle layer of newsroom management has been like a big insight for me. I just talked about how media makes money, which I thought that I understood from my previous jobs, but really I don't think I did. And also just the process of deal making and landing sales. I started to realize that people really respond to energy, right? You're selling a product, but actually you're really selling energy and they're like investing in you and your belief. And so a funny thing would happen where like we would establish a pitch deck and someone would go sell it and they would bomb. And then when me and my co-founder would go sell it, like people would just be like, it's like violins were playing, right? Because we're such believers. Like you really, I think, have to believe. And so for us, even as we're training our sales force and even our reporters and other folks in our company, or companies rather, there's an ambassadorial nature of belief that I really think is so key. And I never understood that when I worked in a newsroom. I think we just thought we were like so essential to democracy and I kind of like ignored all the other stuff. So diversified revenue is erratic revenue. So I started out telling you all the things that went wrong over the last 1.5 years. And so while we can count on the recruitment arm, for example, if the labor market is down, you're not going to be in luck. You can count on government contracts, except if there's an election going on and they decide they don't like you in a particular year, that's off, right? New York City has a law that has to spend more than 50% with community and local news outlets, except if your mayor gets indicted, he might just decide he might not spend that money. So there's just been all these cases where I'm like, we have so many revenue streams, but at every turn, there have been challenges. So you just need to make sure that there's always somewhere else that you can pull from, right? I would say this tension between legacy and digital also scratches the surface. And this is gonna, for those of you who go work in any company, whether it's a media company or, I don't know, an insurance company or, I think this idea of legacy companies and digital really just scratches the surface, like, because so many of us in digital think of ourselves as disruptors. It's actually really hard to keep disrupting yourself. And so in my career, I was like, oh, every 3 or 4 years, I'll like shake things up. And I kind of moved around or learned a new skill like social media or SEO or blog posts or, like all the means of video means of distribution. I would say if you're lucky, we're on like an every 3-month trajectory right now. Like it is moving faster. And I mean that like, what's it's change faster than I've ever experienced. And so I just think for those of us who like, what does it even mean to be digital now is kind of a bit of an open question. Really, really critical, and this we've seen on our recruitment side of the business. There's a lot of jobs in audience growth. I think we make a mistake by focusing on kind of web traffic and audience growth as like our main metric. It's actually about customer acquisition. How are you going to get people to pay you or derive some revenue from that person? So they might pay you directly, right? Like those of you who subscribe to Netflix or Hulu or, it's a direct to consumer product. But even for those of us who are in like nonprofit news or free, no paywall, like free businesses, there still has to be some creation of value that your user is consuming that ultimately relates to your bottom line. And I don't think most newsrooms are organized around that eventual necessity and reality as we really need to be. The last thing I'll just mention is that longevity does not make for a successful digital company. That like, just because you've been around a long time doesn't mean that you're actually successful. One of the questions I've had as we've gone through this is like, are we now going to be, like, are there companies for the moment that we're in and that's good enough? Like 2 or 3 years or a 5-year run. But do we all want to be like Sears or JCPenney or like these other companies that like probably should have shut down a lot sooner than they did? And that's a very uncomfortable question to raise, not just among media companies, but like for, any entrepreneur, right? These are some quick do's and don'ts. I don't think I need to, should I like go through them? I mean, I would just say like having hired a lot, worked with so many interns, I am very worried about kind of workplace readiness right now. I think all of you went through something with the pandemic that just obliterated some years of life and socialization and the way things work, and you're entering workplaces that don't really have a lot of norms, or it's not like as easy to read. I will take the blame for some of that. But I have been more upfront with the interns we have about, look, there are just some ways you're going to have to learn to work. Check your email. Check it a few times a day, especially if an organization functions on email, right? And I know that might make me sound really old because I swear I'm also trying to work in other platforms, but I get very worried about some of the lack of readiness that I'm seeing. So I just wanted to be like honest about some of that. Showing up on time, like this is like so basic, right? This is so basic. And yet, we would have like gatherings and folks would just like walk in 20 minutes late. And I'm like, I'm the person you're trying to impress allegedly. Like, what is happening here? I would say details matter more than anything, like in every job, definitely journalism, but like something's spelled wrong, I kind of remember that things are spelled wrong. And so I might sound like, I don't know, like a hard ass or mean, but I just felt like, I'm just wondering where there's a disconnect right now between what employers need and folks who are kind of starting to fill these jobs. Does that feel fair? Okay, you're nodding. Let's see what else. I'm looking at the don'ts. Yeah, they're like self-explanatory, I think. Oh, off camera. It's just like another one. Like we are in remote environments increasingly. And I've just noticed like people are off camera. And I'm like, look, when we're talking about the energy that you bring to a situation, like sort of being on, literally on, feels like kind of table stakes, like the least thing that you could be doing. And then the last are like kind of similar, learn the rules before you break the rules and don't break the rules before you learn the rules. I think about this a lot because there are, and hopefully in like college, you're getting formats, like whether it's a news article or the way a memo should be delivered or a report but just kind of like, when you learn like the 5-paragraph essay in high school and like you learn it and then you can like go into haiku, right? I just would encourage you to like learn the basics before you break the rules, but that will essentially set you free. And so I tell people all the time, even though we're in a moment of different formats, which I promised your professor I would talk about, learning the basic like article format is so critical in order for you to do community engagement or social media or partnerships with other organizations. Like I still feel like you gotta know the basics of how we work. That was the mean slide. That's it. So I'll keep this up or, whatever, just because I do feel like we're in community with each other right now. You should totally feel free to stay in touch. Those are the websites that you can find some of our work on. What I told your professor I would also talk about, because I believe there's some work at the journalism school with like food banks and other places that you're, extending journalism in partnership. At Epicenter, we actually distribute information all the time in places that are like going where the community is. So food pantries, QR codes. My husband actually donates meals, delivers meals on Tuesdays. And for a while, he was like printing out the newsletter and just like distributing it with the food. I've stood up in church more times since the pandemic just to like give people information on flu shots, mental health resources for teenagers, like just going places where there's already trusted messengers and kind of attaching ourselves to that. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that we also do a lot of work that kind of contextualizes history and storytelling. So one that Epicenter has up right now, we work with the New York Historical, which is a museum off of Central Park West, and we did an exhibit on the sari, which is a South Asian garment, 6 yards of cloth that go around you, 6 to 9 yards, very, very long. But it's about the history of this garment through environmental issues, through the lens of race in New York and Coney Island, having Indian performers come in the 1920s, what that meant, what it's meant to the gay community and used as a symbol to march in New York City's parades. And so I think also just whether this is for journalism or those of you who are in like marketing, for example, just the need for us to shake up how we're doing our storytelling, where we're doing our storytelling feels more incumbent than ever. And so I just share some of those examples as, when we talk about like new formats, people are often be like video on Instagram. And I'm like, oh, I think it's even more revolutionary that we need to just completely disrupt how we're getting people information. So on that note, let's turn it over to you.
All right, so we're gonna go around the room, ask questions, and we're gonna start with you, Jack. You knew it was coming too, didn't you?
Did not know that was. I don't know. Let's say, what do you think is the best, not the best, but like what's one way that people like our age could work on to like going into new workplaces that like to get ready for that?
I mean, I think if you were to get something that like one area that has surprised me is that it's not, the first few weeks are not about journalism. The first few weeks are about what work is like.
Yeah.
So I think if you could get some exposure to that, what year are you in?
I'm a freshman.
You're a freshman,
Yeah.
so that's great, because it's great that you're asking the question. I think if you could just get exposure to, how do people interact with each other here? Is it a quiet workplace? Is it a jokey workplace? Is it somewhere where you can ask for help? Do you save up your questions until the boss comes in on Wednesdays? Like what, and all of that is like, it's like a vibe.
Yeah.
It's not intuitive. It needs to be observed. And so I would sort of put yourself in situations where you could observe. And then hopefully by the time you go to summer internship, which is like every day, what I think was one of the challenges with the interns that we've had, especially recently, is that they go from not having had that to like having to be on for 5 days a week, waking up at like 8 or 9 8. Like it's just a very regimented schedule compared to college, right? And I underestimate that transition in a remote workplace. There isn't a commute that kind of is your transit, you know, like, and again, we're remote. You might have opportunities here that aren't. I'd actually encourage that. What else? Are you going around the
Yeah,
room?
go
Or
around.
all right, okay.
This might be like a simpler question, but I was just really curious, like how you decided to like choose to be in media, and like how you
Yeah.
got started, like CNN.
It's a good question. When I was 16, I did a summer journalism workshop, and anyone ever seen the movie Boys in the Hood?
Yep.
Okay. There's a scene in Boys in the Hood where, spoiler alert, a character dies and they say the newspaper didn't even cover it. And for some reason that just reflection, I was like, huh, that's kind of shitty. This guy was great. Like, and so I thought, well, could I be that person in a newsroom that covers things other people wouldn't cover? And I actually like, it's funny how you get in is sort of how you stay in, right? Because that still feels like kind of the through line of my work.
My question is, do you have like a favorite topic or like story that you like to cover?
Favorite topic or story? I love like behind the scenes stories of like how things came together. So I mean, I go to a lot of theater, but I'm always like intrigued by what's happening behind the scenes. Favorite story, when I was at the Washington Post, I followed a family rather, as they were cleaning up their legal footprint. So they had come to the US undocumented. They received their papers, and then they had to kind of retroactively go and clean up, like they bought a house, they had bank accounts, like it was just a mess of how they had navigated life in America for more than a decade under a shadow economy. So this whole world opened up to me of how undocumented immigrants live. And I just told the story, and I think like that's known, but by telling the story of how they cleaned up, I was able to kind of peel back layers of something that was very complicated. It's probably one of my favorite stories.
I guess this is kind of a simple question. What did like your college experience look like?
What did my college experience look like?
Yeah.
I went to Rutgers University, so fellow state school. I was the editor of the college paper, so I mean, I like when I walked in, I loved seeing like the Daily Iowan and like big letters. Like it's amazing to have a daily college newspaper. We had one too. I loved it. It was independent. While I was there was like protest every other week on campus. It was during a very heated time in the mid-90s. I took journalism like I treated it like a job. And so I think I established work ethic pretty early on, just like I had to do my classes, I had stories to write every day. Then eventually I was an editor. I also took the community engagement piece really seriously because I was the first minority editor-in-chief ever of the college newspaper, which feels so ridiculous because it was like 1997. Like it was not that long. I mean, yes, that sounds so long. I'm sure you weren't born in 1997, but it felt like really like anyway. So we had a lot of relationship or almost like damage control to do with different communities across campus. And so like a big part of my job as editor-in-chief was outreach. And I think again, like it sort of set this belief in you can hit reset on a lot of relationships in life. And which is really empowering if you think about it, right? So that's like my big takeaway from college.
Was there like a time where you like you realized like you were making a difference with your like journalism?
I mean, I think we make a difference like every day. I mean, there's elements of just informing a public that are, necessary and you almost take for granted. There's the smaller stuff. And for Epicenter, like, I don't want us to take for granted, like when we mention a new business and like there was a flower CSA that we mentioned in a roundup the other day and it sold out. Like I don't have the reach of CNN, but like I love that we can support this initiative and that there's impact that's created just by us kind of telling you about something. And I mean, is that, saving a life? Not really, but it is, it's important to that entrepreneur. I would say a lot of our small business coverage, people will tell us it makes a difference because it feels like we're almost like tastemakers, and then the New York Times writes about people 6 months later and then they really blow up. So I kind of like that aspect of it. I do think we function as like a fellow business in the community. A lot of our events I feel super proud of. So we did a tour of the new TWA terminal, which you ever get a chance to look at JFK Airport. It's turned into a hotel now. And we did a tour and we did a thing on the events language. Like if you need, if you can't afford to pay for the tour, just let us know. And a guy emailed us and said, I'm on a fixed income. Can I come? We said, of course, he's from the neighborhood, Jamaica, Queens. And it turns out he'd been a baggage handler in that very terminal in the 1980s. So he like ends up like co-leading the tour, So things like that, I feel like are really, they're like opportunities for us to get out of the way and have other people tell their stories. I think that's probably the impact that I'm more focused on right now.
What does an average day in your job look like?
I don't really have one. I mean, this week has been crazy. So I was at press, because we get a lot of money from philanthropy, like I'm at a lot of conferences where like there was, are you guys familiar with Press Forward? Probably not. It's a local news initiative to essentially grant $500 million to the local news ecosystem in the US. It looks like they're gonna surpass that number. So there was a conference in Charlotte. Yesterday, I was on Capitol Hill. We were meeting Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries because we're advocating for policy change in journalism to support this industry, both from like AI and copyright to tax credits for journalists to like all sorts of structural changes that would just, and also like could cities, as New York has done, like favor local news advertising? Again, Chuck Schumer has a lot of problems right now. He's not going to get to this, but I think we do have to keep showing up, like to make the case for our industry. I feel like a lot of my life right now and my day is spent around two areas. One is solidarity and media, which is why I went. I think it's really important that people like me are at the table. The second is financial support for journalism. So we will not hang on to our democracy if we don't have solidarity in media. And we will not hang on to our democracy if we don't have financial support for media. And so a lot of what I do, especially with the URL Media Network, is like getting capital to the publishers. Can I get you advertising? Can I get you access to a loan program? Can I get you access to some of these grants that we're getting? So it's just very, I mean, those of you who are going into finance, like won't find this boring work, but it is not what you think you're gonna do when you say, I wanna be a journalist. I love it though. I do love that part of it. What else?
When working with like, especially the bigger news outlets, how would you establish a relationship with the person you were interviewing to get them to kind of trust you a bit more?
So I've written 2 books, and I think the best lessons I learned from there was to initially put the notebook away and just kind of hang with people. And when you're interviewing people, you often look for good quotes and then you write them down and then you put them in your article. When you're book writing, you're actually trying to paint a much bigger picture. So you listen for good quotes, but you're actually looking for what the story behind that might have been, which only unfolds if you let it, right? I don't have that much time with a lot of the work that I do now. So I've had to kind of create my own efficiencies or just like be like, hurry up, get to the point. But that's like my main advice would be to just kind of hang. Should we put these people on the spot and go to this side of the room?
Oh, we still got some more.
Just go this, or I wasn't sure if we should like switch it up or something.
No, no, no.
All right, let's keep going.
Oh my, that's these shares.
What was the biggest challenge that you faced while starting Epicenter?
I think it's just the financial. I mean, it's literally like, how do you make this math work? In our best year in 2023, we crossed $1 million, which is incredible for a local news outlet. That's bootstrapped, like we didn't have, it's like kind of incredible. And I thought, wow, we really figured this out, right? And then comes all these other challenges. So this year, I think if we're lucky, it'll be about 750K. We have a big cut is from some of the federal contracts that I mentioned. But I'd say it's making the math work. It's probably and I would say that's the case for much of journalism. Yeah.
What are things that like you do in times when you literally just want to give up? You're just too overwhelmed.
I can't hear you. I'm so sorry.
What kind of things do you do when you just feel like giving up or you're just like too overwhelmed?
Oh, I go to theater. I see a lot of theater. And I like it because I have to turn my phone off, but I don't turn my brain off. And so it feels like I'm kind of still working. Like I work a lot, right? I think I'm just wired that way. So I like that it's relaxing because like there's no email, there's no texting, there's no crisis that I could deal with. But I do feel like it's intellectually stimulating and it is like enough of a break to then kind of go back to a problem with a new perspective. I read too, but I've also been like caregiving a lot lately and it depends on my like frame of mind for that, but yeah.
If you could like go back and change anything about like what you did in college, or if you could give yourself any advice in college, what would you say?
Gosh, advice for college.
I guess pertaining to like your career.
Yeah, I would say that like it took me at least 2 years to learn to pitch ideas. And I think this is like something I sort of was on that slide of like, you read the room, but then you got to engage the room, right? Like you have to pitch ideas, you have to look proactive. That just takes a lot of confidence. And I feel like I was like kind of frozen. Even when I was in summer internships, I was like more reactive, like people would assign me things. And I wasn't necessarily like, how about today we do? And so I learned that by the time I was like 23 and working at Newsday, I totally was like pitching all the time. I probably should have learned that skill earlier because it really does define your success, like as a journalist, but I think in a lot of your chosen professions.
How much stress comes into like journalism, or like does experience range to how much stress you get?
How much, I'm sorry?
How much stress?
Oh, stress. I think it's pretty stressful. I mean, I always feel like journalists are like one crisis away from like a breakdown. Like I really do think it attracts insecure people. It attracts kind of folks who might have some manic tendencies. Like this is like factual. You get a high off of news cycles, but you also might crash, right? So I think it's good to be self-aware. I think the financial piece is so important. Like if I had not worked at CNN where I made a lot of money, I would not be able to do what I do now, right? And making a lot of money, while it doesn't solve all your problems, it does help have a comfortable life and that you can pay the mortgage and your kids can eat and go to college. Like all of that for most journalists is actually a pretty hard calculation right now. Just to give you perspective, our summer intern from Epicenter of a few years ago just got her first full-time job. And we met for drinks to talk about whether she should take it and what the offer looks like. And I said, do you mind me asking how much you're making? And she said $58,000. 30 years ago, when I entered Newsday, that's about the salary I was paid. So we have not seen a lot of increase in our wages in the course of my entire career. right? That to me feels like a very stressful profession and stressful economics to have to like figure out how am I gonna live? How do I have a family? How do I buy a home? And so for a lot of like our team and the companies that I run, like even when times are hard, you know, we offer 100% health insurance. I try to get most people to as close to six-figure salaries as possible. Like I have a certain moral constitution around how we should do things because I'm guided by, oh, it's not great. And I know it's very stressful. What else?
I know you talked about like using AI as your personal assistant, but I was wondering like what your thoughts were on people kind of using AI to get their news, or like for example, when you search something on Google, like the AI blurb comes
Yeah.
up. I was wondering if that like decreases like traffic to your site.
It does, yeah. So most websites are experiencing between like 40 to 60% traffic drop-offs. It's really significant. For local news sites, we were never as dependent on SEO or social, like it just wasn't at the mass of, let's say, like a CNN, right? So there's definitely an effect. It's probably not as drastic. We've definitely seen some traffic drop-offs. How do I feel about the AI summaries? I mean, for the most part, I think it's creating less of an informed public. I see the need for efficiency. So like I do a lot of news that's rooted in utility and information. And so I respect people's time, but I think at least like giving credit to the full source, giving people optionality to go down the rabbit hole, which is like one of my favorite parts of the internet. I feel like we've lost optionality or discovery. Now we're like, I feel sometimes like we're becoming stupider or treated like we're stupider because it's like a summary. And then my Facebook feeds are all made up AI videos from like friends or like people's funerals that are not real funerals, or like Barack Obama's getting divorced, like fake news, and which tells you something about my consumption because it just keeps going, right? That I think is really detrimental. The like decision by the platforms to not favor news or vetted content feels very dangerous.
It seems like the news cycle moves so quickly now.
Well,
The news cycle moves so quickly now,
Yeah.
especially compared to like 10 years ago. What do you think has been the catalyst for that? And also, how do you guys address that?
oh, well, I think we don't have a shared kind of news agenda anymore, right? There isn't agreement on the news, let alone the sources of what we're turning to every day. And I also don't want to romanticize the way it used to be. Certainly, a lot of the communities that we represent never felt represented on the evening news, right? Unless it was like a crime story. So I think that I don't want to create nostalgia for a media that like really got everything right. But I do think that we had like consumption of a nation of a shared news agenda. We agreed on a certain set of facts and norms. And that is fraying. I would say the social platforms are largely to both blame and kind of address your question, which if you look at, and again, I engaged in a lot of this in mainstream media, but the idea of like a take or headlines that are very clicky kind of also created polarized content, meaning like you'll never believe XYZ or this is outrageous. And so if you think about stories and even communities, there's really rarely two sides, even though journalism teaches you to talk to two sides. Like, you know, people might be really pro-abortion, but they might have a gun, or someone might have a small business, but they also are really liberal on education funding because they have a special needs child, or, you know, like we kind of categorize people as left and right when people are not embracing a left or right identity. They embrace the identities of many parts of their lives, right? Social media actually continues to distill us into these poles. And so studies show that what happens is more people disengage because they're not represented in those polls. And so what you're left with is kind of the crazy polls, and everyone else, like most of us in the room, just opt out, right? That to me feels really dangerous in terms of a news agenda or a news site, like, because what is the place for us? And a lot of local news, I feel like, gets that because they don't really see issues in this binary, like even the casino issue, for example. Who wants a casino in their backyard? Like, really nobody. But why are the economics of a casino potentially good for this union or that, and then you start to understand why people are supporting it. Does that make sense?
Where's your favorite place that you've worked over your career?
I think I've like learned something from all of them. Because I worked in each place during such different versions of the internet, they felt like such different, like courts, I learned so much about like social media traffic. Newsday, I loved serving a community and working in New York City. I covered 9/11, like it's so memorable. I love what I'm doing now because it feels like I'm able to not just work and serve the community, but also like exercise this part of my business brain that I didn't even know I had. And I'm like really, I just feel like I'm learning something new around that every day. So I guess that's a good answer that I have never hated somewhere I've worked. I've certainly hated people I've worked with. But I've not really, I mean, maybe the LA Times, when I was the managing editor, we went through like 3 publishers when I was there. It was a very frustrating experience, but I learned so much about newsroom ownership as a result of that experience. So if I hadn't done it, I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. What else?
Well, it's been like a really rewarding moment in your career where you were like, this is why I do this.
Oh, I mean, it's like, I feel like especially in local, there's like a high every day because people will be like we just did a story on subway surfing. Do you guys know what that is? People are like on the top of the subway and like we just published like a script on how to talk to your kids about it. And like I loved it because it was not lectury. It was intentionally kind of like, we know this is happening in your feeds, like, and someone just messaged me and we're like, this is like so useful. So like even something like that, I feel great about because I'm like, yeah, we tried to do something in a format that's human and useful and not like, official said blah, 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 like that's not going to help anybody. So I think when people say you tried to help me and I was helped is like the best part of the job.
Is there a story that you felt like wouldn't gain a whole lot of traction and ended up doing it, or the opposite? And how was it going for
Oh
some?
God, all the time. All the time you think you're going to have impact. So I worked in India. I launched a business newspaper there in New Delhi. India, very corrupt government. Like we would expose corruption all the time and we would publish it and I'd be like, okay, who's going to get fired or who will go out of business? And what I learned in India is that eventually justice comes around, but it's very slow. And so even today, like some of the stories that we wrote, like are still moving through the justice system. And that was, I was there, I don't know what, 17 years ago. So I think it's just being patient and feeling and like believing that this will make a difference.
Do you have any like tips and tricks on time management when you're getting like pulled in multiple different directions?
Yeah, I set timers a lot. I also, like when I have to write something, I found myself like dragging my whole house down with me for like days and days. Or I don't know if you guys do this where like you'll watch something, but your laptop is in front of you. And it's like, I'm not really watching TV. I'm really not working on this. I'm trying to multitask, but nothing's getting. So I've tried to pay more attention to like being focused on the one thing I'm supposed to do in a given moment. And that's helped. Because when I launched this company, obviously I run 2 companies. For a while I was writing a column. I have 2 kids. Like I think you could probably tell like people are in and out of my house asking for things all day long. So I had to figure out like, what am I focused on right now? And what am I choosing to be focused on right now? And I think that's probably the ultimate time hack. Yeah. What else?
So like you said, so all the places you worked at, what like, I guess you said a little bit about like how community journalism was something that you wanted to cover, like those communities that weren't being covered or like not in the way that you thought was like most useful to them. I guess like what were other, like, I guess, driving factors for you to make that switch?
Yeah. I think in 2020, I saw what CNN was getting out of me, but I didn't really know what I was getting out of CNN anymore. I had spent the previous 5 years covering the Trump administration, and we didn't even know, when I decided to leave, we didn't know who would win the election. It was ultimately Biden, but we didn't know that. And I was just like, I just feel like I can't go through the next few years covering things in the way that we've already been doing it. There was just something about the format that I was starting to not have belief in, to my point about belief and energy being really important, kind of calculus of why we do what we do. And so I just literally was like, I know what they're getting out of me, but I don't know what I'm getting out of this anymore. And I do feel like that's an important, like, it's okay to ask yourself, besides a really nice paycheck, which I already told you about, like, am I being fulfilled? Am I being challenged? And I think, like, besides like serving communities of color, I also think that I've just been exposed to so much more innovation. So many of our publishers are small. They have like 2 or 3 staffers if they're lucky, right? But some of the innovation that comes out, because they can pivot so quickly versus like at CNN, or you're moving a newsroom of 4,000, or when I was at the LA Times, moving a newsroom of 400 to 500 people, like it can be slow. And so what I've really learned, especially for this kind of moment we're in, which is like the most upheaval I've seen, economically, societally, technologically, there's, I just feel like I'm learning from people who've innovated in ways that I never was challenged, because of the places I worked were like better resourced. So that's like just kind of a scrappier mindset. I feel like I learn something from that every day. What else? You're good?
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Are either of you?
no, I was gonna say, oh, you got a question?
Yeah, I'll get.
Go for it.
Okay. What do you think media should be doing to try to increase trust?
Oh, great question. It's not hard, and I didn't know it until the last 5 years. If you help someone once, they will definitely call you back. Simple. If you help someone once, they call you a second time, and then but you have to get the answer to the second thing right. And most of our newsrooms are organized like you cover health. So you write a health article and someone calls you and they say, I need a tutor for my kid. And you might say, I don't cover education, I cover health. So we lose trust when we're like shutting down. So I think our ability to keep engaging is a part of the trust, meaning there's like something created in that back and forth that's like part loyalty, part repeat engagement, but also like, can we serve people in a multitude of ways? That's at least how I've seen the trust factor. Yeah. Are you about to say something?
Let's give it up for Mitra. I know you got like.
Thank you.